Before we develop the person class further, let's recap what we have done so far. So we have declared a person class for the person templates for person entities. And then we have declared 3 attributes, the name of type string, and the weights of type double, and also the attribute heights of type double. And we have a way called constructor for creating new instances of the person type. And for calling the constructor, which has to be of the same name as the class, we have to pass 3 inputs in order to initialize the values for the 3 attributes. So we have parameter name called n of type string. The second parameter has the name w of type double. And the third parameter h of type double. And the types over here are compatible with their corresponding attribute. You can see string double double here, and also string double double here. Okay, and then in the body of the implementation for the constructor, we simply do the proper assignments by storing the values of the inputs into the attributes. And the way we run this code, the way we test it, is by using the tester. And it's for test-driven development. As soon as our code becomes executable, we start testing it. So we simply ran 2 lines of code over here. So the first line over here, we say that we create a person object called P1, another person object called P2. And P1 and P2, they store the addresses of person objects. There's something I want to emphasize again. They do not store the objects entirely, which can be very big, because if you got 100 attributes in the objects, you don't really have to store 100 attributes in a variable. You simply store the address of the objects. Okay, that's something we'll try to also emphasize over and over throughout the course. Okay, so here we got these 2 lines over here. Let's try to recap what these 2 lines should do. Okay, so these are the 2 fragments of Java code that we need to consider. Again, we have this person class over here, and we have this person tester to test the functionality of the person class. And in the person class, we got the 3 attributes over here. We got name, we have weights, we have heights, and also we have this person constructor. And now we have these 2 lines. Let's call this line. We got these 2 lines over here to create 2 objects. Let's just review very quickly how what this should do. Okay. Again, the way we analyze each line of the object creation is by splitting that into 3 steps. I'm not going to repeat the 3 steps in complete details. You can refer to the previous video to see the details. Okay. So now, for the first line, let me just highlight that. So let me just use a different color here. Let's say this one over here is green. Okay. And let's say the second one is going to be blue. Okay, let's see what these 2 lines would do. Okay, now for the first one over here, the step number 1 is going to create a new object by calling the person constructor, where it's going to instantiate. So it's going to call this first person constructor for the first time, and then it's going to instantiate n by Jin, and then instantiate n by Jin, and then instantiates w by 80. Okay, w by 80, and also instantiate h by 1.85. h by 1.85. So what does that mean? That means somewhere in the memory, I'm not going to draw the memory again. So I'm just going to draw conceptually just a box. And that's how you should do when you try to reason about this by yourself. So the first object is going to be, and always remember, once you draw the box, you gotta put a title for the box. The title of the box should be the type of the class that it is instantiated from. In this case, there'll be a person class. So that's the first call to the constructor. And we know that every person object has 3 attributes: name, weights, and heights. Name, weights, and heights. And over here, so here for the first call to the constructor, the context objects over here, this, as we said before, this means the current context object. The current context object simply refer to this particular object over here. Okay, so when you say this.name is assigned to Jin, this.weight is assigned to 80, this.height is assigned to 1.85, it should be quite obvious what you should do. Okay, when you say this dot name is assigned to Jim, so this is this green object over here is assigned to Jim, and then this dot weight is assigned to 80, and then this dot height is assigned to 1.85. Okay, that's step number one for this particular green line here. Step number two, we declare a object variable or reference variable called P1, and P1 is going to store the address of some person objects. In this case, the address of this object here is going to be stored by the step number 3 of this line here. And then conceptually, we simply say because P1 is going to store the address of this object here, so we can simply say P1 is going to point to this object here. Okay, P1 does not represent the object itself. P1 stores the address of that object. That means by looking at the address that is stored in P1, we can go to the memory location to look for the objects. So it's kind of indirect. Okay. So now, so that will be for the first line. Okay. What about for the second line? For the second line, we're going to use blue over here. Okay. Let's use the blue over here. Okay. So it's going to be a similar process. So now for the step number 1, for this blue line over here. So for this, for step number 1, we're going to call this the same constructor over here. So we're going to call this the second time. Okay, and then we're going to instantiate n over here by Jonathan. Okay, so I'm going to put on the top over here the same constructor but with different instantiation for the parameters. And then we're going to instantiate w by 85. Okay, it's going to be 85 this time. And then, of course, every occurrence of n is going to be instantiated by Jonathan. And then every occurrence of w is going to be instantiated also by 80. And also every occurrence of h is going to be instantiated by 1.76. Okay, this is going to be instantiated by 1.76. So you can see it's basically the same definition, but now the values to be set will be different. Okay, so now that means we're going to allocate for step number 1 for this line here, allocate just another object here. So we draw another box of the same type. So the title will be the same, just person over here. And then because it's a person object, so we got the same 3 attributes: name, weight, and height. Okay, so we have name, we have weight, and we have height. And then over here we can see and now the context object is going to be this particular blue object over here. So I'm going to just highlight that. Okay, this is now the context object that we are talking about, rather than this green one here in the previous line, and now it's going to be the blue one. That's this. So when we say over here, when we say this dot name is assigned to Jonathan, in that case, we'll assign that to Jonathan. And when we say this dot height is assigned to 80, we're going to assign the weight to be 80. And this dot weight for the previous assignments. And then for this dot height is assigned to 1.76. We're going to assign 1.76 over here. And then for step number 2 for the second line, over here we declare a person P2. So P2 is going to be just another object reference variable, which is going to store just the address of some object person objects. In this case, you're going to store this particular object here. That's what we're going to point to. So now we got 2 objects in the memory. One is called one is for Jim, the other one is for Jonathan. And P1 stores the address for the first objects, and P2 stores the address for the second objects. Okay, so that's what we have done for the previous video. I'm just trying to illustrate in a more concise way, but I should really try to go through the discussion for how the objects are created in thorough details. That's really important. Okay, let's now continue to see how we can define some methods for our person class. So there are basically 2 kinds of, you can think of constructor is one kind of methods in Java. This kind of method is very special. The name has to be the same as the class name, and also the purpose is for creating an object. There are another 2 kinds of methods. Okay, one is called accessor, the other one is called mutator. Let's do accessor for this video first. Okay, so now let's say define accessor methods, which ask, I'll just put a little bit more informally, which ask questions about the context objects, and the context object can be either P1 or P2, and return some answers to the questions. Okay, I'm going to just define two accessors for you to see. Okay, so now let's do the simple one, and then we do slightly more complicated one. And now, since here, let me just say this, return, let me just put it in capitalized, all capital, that means it's really important, and it's gonna get some return value basically. So now, we have to say what kind of value is going to be returned by this particular method for the question. So let's say we want to ask what's the BMI for this particular person. When you say, for example, if you go to the tester here, we got P1 and P2. When we say P1.getBMI and as opposed to P2.getBMI, they should be different, right? Because these two persons, they got different weights and heights, so their BMI calculation should be different. We learned about this kind of behavior in the object orientation video before. Okay, so now the first one, we're gonna say the return type, let's say double. The BMI should be some floating point or real number. Double, and then the name of the method. You can say get BMI, and then within the parentheses, you may pass some additional input for the calculation. But in this case, to calculate the BMI, we only have to use the weights and the heights of the context object, so we don't need any extra information. So we can leave it empty. Okay, there will be some cases where you need some extra parameter, but we'll see that. But previously, for the constructor over here, because to create a new person, we definitely need some extra inputs, like the what's the new name, what's the new weight, what's the new height. But now to calculate a BMI for some given person, let's say either P1 or P2, P1 and P2 already have their attributes, weight and height set, so we don't need any extra input. That's why this parenthesis list should be just empty. Okay, so now over here, basically we're going to, in general, for any accessor method, we're going to make use of the attribute values of the current context objects. Do some computation, then return the computation result. That's in general the pattern. Okay, let's do this step by step. Okay. Okay, let's do that. Okay, first of all, we can declare some local variables. Declare a local variable. Local variable in the sense that whatever variable we declare inside this method here is only visible within this method. You cannot use the variable outside the method. We'll talk about the scope of variables a little bit later. But define a local variable to store the intermediate computation result. Okay, so now we can declare local variable. Declare type. We can say BMI is assigned to some expression value. So remember, to calculate the BMI, we do weight divided by the square of the heights. So here, the reason that I put parentheses over here is to force the order of evaluation. I want to calculate the square of the height before I treat it as a divisor for this division over here. Okay. So now once I'm done with that, I can say return BMI. Okay, that will be the definition of getBMI. Okay, let's see how this works before we get to the second accessor. Okay. So now let's go back. You can see how useful test-driven development is, because as soon as we are done with this method here, to know if that works, we can just go back to person tester. Okay. So now, given that we got two instances or two objects of type person, we can ask about what's their BMI. Okay, let's try that. So we can write use system.out.println, and then over here we can pass let's try that. We can say Jim's, so that's a string, Jim's BMI is, okay, and then concatenate it with the result. So now we can say, now pass a context object and ask something about it. So use a dot notation to say get BMI. Okay, I will explain exactly what this method call is going to do on the paper first. And then I will use the debugger to show you. And then system.out.println. And then you can see Jonathan's BMI is, and then plus p2.getBMI. Okay, so you can see basically these two method calls, the first method call being p1.getBMI and p2.getBMI. So these are exactly the same. They are calling exactly the same getBMI method, which means they are going to apply the same definition of the getBMI method. However, because the context objects are different, the first context object is p1, which has the attribute values for weight and height 80 and 1.85. And the second method called to getBMI, the context object is p2, which has weight and height being 85 and 1.76. You can see applying the same definition with different inputs is going to give you different results. Okay, that's something also we talk about in the object orientation video. Okay, now, of course, you can just run it and see what's going on. Okay, why don't we try first of all, and I'll explain to you on the paper. Okay, so now you can right click on the person tester over here and say run person tester.main. Okay, it's going to take a little bit of time over here. It shows the progress over here. Okay, and see what's the result. Make it a little bit bigger. Okay, it shows that Jim's BMI is this number here, and Jonathan's BMI is this number here. First of all, you can see one is about 23, the other one is about 27. Okay, so now these results are actually correct. You can double check with some other calculators. But now I want to show you how exactly to understand how these two method calls work. Okay, so what I would do is I'm going to just have a new page. Okay, and then try to explain to you how this will work. Okay, I'm still going to put some information about a class for person. So I'm going to say class person. And then, so we have three attributes. So now the name attribute in this way doesn't really matter too much. So now I'll just put a partial view. So you have double the weight. And also double the height. Okay, and then what we have is the getBMI method is double getBMI over here. Okay, let me just go back there to the Android Studio. I want to change, just add something here to make it even more understandable for you. Okay, so here we are referring to the attributes. So implicitly, pretty much like what we did over here, implicitly we can put this before the attribute value every time if we want to refer to the attributes. So let me put this the weights, and also this the heights, and also here this the heights. Nothing will change in terms of the output. It completely equivalent as in terms of the meaning. You can rerun this tester here to double check the result will be the same. I'll leave that to you. Okay, and then let me just come back over here, and then I will just show over here. So we have double BMI is assigned to this dot weight divided by this the height multiplied by this the height. So that's the definition for the method, and then return BMI over here. Remember that for the mutated method, you should always have, for accessor. For accessor method, which will return to you some answer about some questions, you should always have the return statement. It's really important. Okay. And then we have, okay, that's about the person class. Okay, let me just do that over here. Okay, just okay, that's a person class. And now what we want to do is let me just see if I can just copy and paste the two diagrams from before. It might be a little bit difficult. Okay, so now from the previous two lines, we got P1 and P2. Let me just put that very quickly. Okay. So from these two lines of creation from the previous one, we can see person tester. Before we call P1.getBMI, P2.getBMI, we actually got these two lines, and we learned before what will be the consequence of these two lines. Okay, let me draw that very quickly. Okay. So we have over here P1 is pointing to some person objects. Okay. With I'm going to be a little bit lazy here, so it's going to be the name, weights, and heights. Okay, and it's going to be Jim 80 and 1.85. 80 and 1.85. And the second object, P2, is going to store the address of another object over here. And it's going to be person. And then it's going to be Jonathan 80, 1.76. Jonathan 80, 1.76. Okay, let me just make sure the value is right. Oh, it should be 85 actually. 85, 1.76. Okay, and that's a name, attribute, that's a weight, and that's a height. Again, don't get confused. These are the attributes. And these over here, which may be different between instances, these over here are the attribute values. Okay, just for clarification, attribute values. Okay, so now let's go back to this method call here. When we say p1.getBMI, what does it do? Okay, so now in the person tester, first of all, we have, let's say, use green again. Let's say when we say p1.getBMI, so what does it do? First of all, this is so-called a method call. Okay, that's something you should know. It's a method call. Okay, and over here, let's highlight the context objects. So this one over here, P1 over here, is the context objects. Which means by looking at the address of the person object that is stored in P1, we're going to look for it in the memory. And by just going to P1, looking at the P1 address over here, we're going to see that it is referring to this object over here. Okay, so now when you say P1.getBMI over here, it's going to call this getBMI method that's defined in the person class. Okay, and now over here you can see that what's really important is over here. So now we know that P1 is a context object. So that means we're going to replace every occurrence of this over here by P1 and P1. So that means for this particular question or method call to getBMI, we're going to return the computation based on P1.weights, which is 80, and P1.heights. P1.weight is here, P1.height is here, 1.85, and P1.height will be 1.85. Okay, so you can see depending on what the context object is, we're going to instantiate this over here by the context objects. And once we instantiate the context object, it'll be obvious for the computer to know where to look for in the memory for the specific attribute values. Okay, let's try another one. The second line over there is p2.getBMI. Okay, in this case, what should we do? So now we should really only change the context object, but the same definition should apply. Okay, so now let me just do that over here. Let me use blue. Okay, let's say p2 dot get BMI over here. Okay, what would it do? So now over here you can see the context object over here is now changed to p2. Okay, it is now the context objects. So whenever you have a method call to reason about, you should really know what the context object is. Depending on the context object, the attribute values that will be used will be different. Okay, so now, so that means we're going to call this method for the second time. I'm going to use maybe the blue over here. Okay, so now we're going to use, so p2 over here is now the context object, but we're going to call the same method also called getBMI. Okay, so getBMI is going to be called for the second time, right? But now every occurrence of this is going to be replaced by p2. So now it's going to be replaced by p2, replaced by p2, replaced by p2. So now when we do the same calculation formula, now the input will be different. When we say p2.weights, it will be referring to 85. And then when we say p2 dot height is going to be 1.76. And then here similarly 1.76. So that's why when you see the getBMI return value over here, it's different, right? So now to be more precise over here, you can see when we say when the context object is p1, what we are trying to calculate is 80 divided by the square of 1.85. Okay, and then when we try to get a return value for getBMI where the context object is p2, what we are trying to calculate is 85 divided by the square of 1.76. Okay, you can see the same formula, but depending on the context object, the return value will be different. Okay, that's how you analyze a particular method call. Okay, so now having this explained thoroughly, so let's define just another accessor method, and then we are done for this video. Okay, let's go to define another one. Okay, let me just document this a little bit more. getBMI. Given the current context objects, weight and height, apply the BMI calculation formula. Okay, so now let's do another accessor method. Now this is also a very common one to do. Okay, and I simply just want you to type toString. Okay, you will see that it pop up over here a method for you toString. Hit enter here. So now this is a special method in Java, which I'll explain to you maybe more details later in the course, but you can definitely use it. So the toString method I'll give you is also an accessor method, which means when you say p1.toString versus p2.toString, it's going to return some different answers to you depending on the attribute values. Okay, so it's going to return a string representation of the current person. Objects. Okay, let's try that. So now how do we do that? We'll follow the same pattern here. We can make use of the attribute value, and then we can do the we can also do the return at the end. Okay, so always remember, for any accessor method, you must have a return type, and you must have a return statement at the end. Okay, for toString, what should we do? So we can say, because we're going to return a string, let's say a string, and then we can say s over here, initially just empty string. And we're going to accumulate this string by using string concatenation. And then eventually we're going to return s. Okay, so let's say if I have, for example, let's say over here, if I have the person tester here, so let's say for each person, if I say p1.toString, I'm going to say Jim had Jim's BMI is, let's say exactly this input, this output here, okay? So I don't have to repeat this particular string every time when I try to do a print line. Okay, just make it more useful. Okay, what I can do is s, okay, so now how do is equal to itself concatenated with the name, this dot name, okay, the attribute there, and then the same s accumulated with the name is assigned to s plus okay, what Jim or Jonathan, and then BMI is plus, okay, I'm gonna make it a little bit more interesting for you, but I'll show you a way to simplify that. And then we can do a calculation again. Okay, we can say double BMI is this dot weights divided by this dot height multiply this dot height over here. And then we can now say S is assigned to S plus the BMI over here. Okay, now I want you to notice one thing. I will show you how you can fix it, simplify that. This line of code is exactly the same or repetition of this line of code. So we say that when you have repetition of your code, that means your code smiles. Sorry, not smile. Your code smells. That means it's not good. Okay, you have some smell in your code. But I'll show you how you can fix it by calling the getBMI as a helper method. But basically, what this will do, one simplification you can do, whenever you have s is assigned to s plus something, okay, which includes itself, what you can do is simplify this as plus equal. That's something we'll talk about also later on in the course. Okay, I'll just put it here. Okay, so you can use the original one or you can use this one here. Both work. Okay, return s. Okay, so now as an exercise for you, let me just go to person tester over here. So let me just put these two lines into comments over here so they won't be executed anymore. I just want to include method calls from the previous one. Okay, so now I can say system.out.println. Here I can say p1.toString and system.out.println, and here p2.toString. As an exercise for you, I would like you to trace how these two method calls work by following the same exercise as I did for getBMI to make sure you really understand how the method call work, depending on what the P1 and P2 being the context objects, right? Okay, let's see what will be the printout from this. What we can expect to see is the printout should be different because P1 and P2 are different context objects. Okay, let's execute this code here. And let's see what happened. Okay, it's gonna wait a little bit longer, but it's now building. Okay, now we got basically this is the string output from P1.toString. This is the printout from P2.toString. Okay, I'll leave the trace to you. You should follow exactly the same procedure as before. That is really important for you to complete this small exercise. Okay, after this, let's go back to person here. I promise that I will show you a way to actually get rid of the smell of your code. Okay, let me just say that. This line below is a repetition of what getBMI accessor method would do. So it adds smell to your code. To improve, simply replace this line by a call to the getBMI. Okay, so basically every time when you call a method, it's like reusing the definition. Okay, so now I'm gonna replace this line over here Okay, just put it into comments. What I can say is BMI over there is going to be, okay, just declare that double BMI is assigned to just getBMI. Okay, so basically this getBMI over here is going to apply the same definition over here. It's as if we try to call the getBMI separately. Okay, so now you can also put this over here. That's even more obvious because let's say when you, let me give you some idea. Over here, when you say p1.toString, what would it do? The context object is p1. That means we're going to replace every occurrence of this by p1. Now in this case, we're going to say p1.name over here, and this will be p1.getBMI, right? When we say p1.getBMI, which we have done, and in that case, it will return, you will in turn to say p1.weights divided by p1.heights multiply p1.height. Okay. Now, on the other hand, when you try to call p2.toString over here, what it will do is the context object, this will be replaced by p2. In this case, what we will get is we'll get p2.name, and then we'll call p2.getBMI. And in turn, we're going to say p2.weights divided by p2.heights multiply p2.height. Okay, hopefully you see that, but I really want you to try on the paper to see exactly how this works. So to recap, what we have achieved in this video is we have done two the so-called accessor methods. Let me put it in all capitals. So this is one kind of methods where we simply ask questions about the context objects, P1 or P2 or any other objects. And then we should always get some return value because if you ask questions, and then you really get an answer. Okay, so that's why for every accessor method, you must have a return type to begin with, and then the name of the method, and also maybe some parameters for your accessor method. But in this case, toString and getBMI, we do not need any extra information apart from the attribute values. In that case, we don't need it. But we'll see some cases. There are many cases where you do need some extra parameters, but we'll see them when we get there. And then you always remember for the return, for any accessor method, you should always end it with a return statement, which means whoever is calling this particular method here, they can get the return value. For example, in the person tester over here, you can see that we are trying to call p1.toString, which is going to return over here a string value, right? And then this string value is going to return and be made use of by this particular print statement. And similarly, when we call p2.toString, also it is going to return just another string s over here, and that is going to be used by whoever is calling this method, which is the print statement, right? It's going to be passed to the console. Okay, so that's about the accessor methods, and in the next video, we'll show you how you can define another kind of methods which do not ask questions. It simply command some changes of your object states or your attribute values.